You could be pronouncing every English sound perfectly, have excellent grammar, and a well-developed vocabulary, and still not be understood. The real reason your English sounds unclear may be something you've never even heard of. It could be your word stress. In this video, I'll show you the simple patterns you can use to place stress correctly, even in the longest words, to make sure you're understood the first time you speak. I'm Nicole Kaup, and I work with international professionals to refine their English pronunciation so their speech is clear, confident, and effective. Word stress is one of the top areas I work on with my clients who need clearer speech. So first, what is word stress? Words in English are divided into parts called syllables, and every word with two or more syllables has at least one stressed syllable. Now here's why this matters. Listeners identify words first by their stress pattern. So if the stress is in the wrong place, your listener may not recognize the word right away or at all. And that's when you get asked to repeat yourself. So what actually makes a syllable stressed? There are three main things. The vowel sound is held longer, it's slightly louder, and it's higher in pitch. Let me show you what that sounds like. Summer, agree, celebrate, opportunity. I'm exaggerating a bit so you can hear it clearly, but this is what's happening in natural speech, just a little more subtly. The next question is, how do you know which part of the word is stressed? Let's start by looking at short words. First, let's look at the stress pattern associated with two-syllable nouns. So people, places, things, or ideas. They're usually stressed on the first syllable. For example, leader, reason, office, market. This is a very consistent pattern, which works in about 90% of the cases. Two-syllable verbs tend to have the opposite pattern. About 60% of two-syllable verbs are stressed on the second syllable. For example, attend, repeat, control. But some very common verbs stress the first syllable. Some examples include order, travel, listen. While two-syllable nouns are much more predictable in their stress pattern, verbs are a little more mixed. Even so, there are clear patterns that help you predict where to place stress in short verbs. Let's take a look at some helpful tips you can use to determine whether your short verbs are stressed on the first or the second syllable. Stress on the second syllable is the more dominant pattern for verbs, and you can often confirm this by looking at the beginning of the verb. Look for weak beginnings. If a short verb starts with one of the following, it will almost always stress the second syllable. A, RE, CO, and PR. Let's look at some common examples. Agree, accept, repeat, reply, control, collect, produce, protect. Word endings can also help you identify the stress pattern of short verbs. Some endings are almost never stressed, whether they're on verbs, nouns, or any type of word. Here are a few noteworthy ones. ER, N, L, and IT. Some example words that have these endings include offer, answer, open, mention, settle, cancel, visit, and limit. So if you see a word with one of those endings, you know the stress will be on the first syllable. Now, before we move on and talk about how to stress longer words, I want to let you know that I created a booklet to accompany this video. No need to take notes while you're watching. If you'd like to review and quiz yourself on what you're learning here, just scan the QR code on the screen or look for the link in the description below to download your free booklet. Now let's take a look at longer words. Now that you have a good idea of how to predict the stress in shorter words, let's take a look at longer words, those with 4, 5, and 6 syllables. The stress in these words follows a completely different pattern, and this is where many advanced speakers often struggle most. Believe it or not, it's actually quite a bit easier to predict stress on long words than it is on the shorter ones. The pattern is much more consistent. The key concept in determining stress in longer words is look for clues at the end of the word, not at the beginning. The ending, or suffix, in longer words tells you where the stress goes. The most common is what I call the type 1 suffix, or the I suffix. The largest number of suffixes fall into this category. These suffixes place the stress one syllable before the ending. I call them I suffixes because the majority of them begin with the letter I, so they're easy to remember. Here are some very common I suffixes: ION, ITY, IC, IAL, IAN, IBLE, IOUS, IFY, ISH, and IENT. And here are a few words ending in those I suffixes. Note that the stress on each of these words will fall on the syllable just before the suffix ending. This means you're listening for the greatest emphasis on the vowel sound that comes before the suffix ending. Opportunity, information, economic, financial, ambitious, establish. Now, a lesser common stress pattern is on what I call type 2 suffixes, which I've also nicknamed AI suffixes. These place the stress 2 syllables before the suffix ending. 3 of the most common of these suffixes all begin with the letter A. But then there's also a very common suffix, IZE, which also follows the type 2 pattern. So this is why I call them the AI's suffixes. And here they are: ATE, ARY, AR, and IZE. Examples include investigate, voluntary, spectacular, and apologize. So now you're armed with a few simple rules to help you predict stress patterns in most words. Just remember, if you want to be heard the first time, improving word stress is one of the fastest ways to improve clarity. If you're using equal stress on all syllables of a word, or worse, emphasizing the wrong syllable in words, your listener has to work harder to understand you, and sometimes the words will just not register. When your stress is correct, your words become easier to recognize, and your speech not only easier to follow, but more impactful and more influential. Research shows that when listeners understand you easily, they perceive you as more trustworthy and give greater authority to your words. Now, there's another critical piece to clear, listener-friendly speech that goes hand in hand with the topic of word stress. Although vowel sounds are generally the main focus in stressing a syllable, there are a few consonant sounds that, if not enunciated fully, make it difficult for your listener to detect the stressed syllable. And this is a surprisingly common problem that's very easily fixable. Make sure to check out my next video to correct that mistake for clear and professional English.